welcome to part 3 of our biological basis of emotions and its role in social interactions. In the last part, we discussed the ways biological emotion facilitates thought through biological emotion, and now we'll be discussing how the brain understands emotion and how the brain tries to manage emotions. And so the first part of the brain we will be talking about is the medial prefrontal cortex. This area is involved in causality detection. It's also important in response inhibition and inhibition of one's own beliefs to be able to mentalize false beliefs. So basically, this part of the brain is actually able to inhibit your own belief system or your own mentality in order to allow you to mentalize another person's thought, and this attributes to theory of mind. And this area of the brain is involved in executive function and social script sequencing. So social scripts are where the prefrontal cortex of the brain tries to come up with predictions of scenarios or situations based on the calculations of yourself and of other people in order to better, integrate socially with groups or with other people. And we see that when you meet somebody new, the prefrontal cortex activates to figure out what to do in a situation. The dorsal medial prefrontal cortex activates when strange figures appear, basically to try to come up with a new system of understanding, of looking at the other person and understanding their traits and their values. And then the ventral medial prefrontal cortex activates in inferences of familiar figures, so groups that we already feel that we belong in. And the medial prefrontal cortex is also involved in this sort of, where do we belong, who do we belong to or with, and is very important in that. And as we see here, similar to when we looked at the superior temporal sulcus and the temporal parietal junction, the prefrontal cortex was also measured in a meta-analysis where they measured activations for traits and scripts, theory of mind, beliefs about other people, understanding the actions of other people or the actions of oneself, and of course the response sequence or the appropriate ways to respond to different situations. And here we have the insular cortex, or more specifically the anterior insula, which is involved in biological prediction of behavior, biological prediction of the internal body states and the external states of social situations. So what we see is that in the dorsal AI, we see more activation on behavior prediction of emotional states of others and the self. And when someone is seeing an emotional state of another person, this area is also activated in trying to figure out the correct response to it, or have empathy, or sort of go through some sort of understanding of the other person's emotional state. And the ventral anterior insula is more involved with the internal physiological body states, being able to basically detect, whether or not something's going on in the body. You can detect your own heartbeat, basically trying to best predict the best possible scenario for your internal states and for your external states. And as we can see in a meta-analysis, when measuring the anterior insula and also the anterior cingulate gyrus, that different areas of the brain activate when you yourself are feeling pain. As we can see, and as we know from the anterior cingulate gyrus research, that this also involves social pain. And then there's also parts of the anterior insula that activate for empathy for pain. And as we can see here in this meta-analysis, the empathy for pain is not quite as strong or has as big of a reaction as self-pain, but it does serve a role in being able to appropriately respond to another person's pain. And that's very important for empathy and being able to navigate social situations. So the first two parts of the brain that we just discussed, the medial prefrontal cortex and the anterior insula, are involved in understanding others' emotions and one's own emotions. But now we're going on to ways that the body is actually able to manage its own emotions. And so we'll be looking at two areas of the brain here. One is the precuneus, and the other is the posterior cingulate gyrus. The precuneus is known to be involved in memory retrieval, so whenever we're trying to bring back a memory, this area of the brain activates, and the posterior cingulate gyrus is involved in processing the emotion and the episodic memory. So basically, whatever the emotional state that is happening from the retrieval of the emotion is also being processed through the posterior cingulate gyrus. And so in a study where patients were given cognitive behavioral therapy, or CBT, they showed that when people were able to practice more mindfulness or change their way of thinking, they saw that there was actually decreased activation in the precuneus and the cingulate gyrus when they were receiving that therapy, and when they were being helped to rethink or go through these memories in a different way, or to a different way of thinking. And of course, these areas of the brain are also part of self-referential thoughts. So when using CBT, the less focus on oneself or your memories does seem to have effect in being able to cause less activation in your anterior cingulate gyrus and parts of the brain that are involved in your distress system. So the less likely you are to think about something that is distressing or causing you anxiety, the less activity is involved there. And this goes along with another study that was done on the idea of social sharing. So social sharing is essentially just talking to somebody else about your memories, your thoughts, and in this study it talked about sharing with somebody else something traumatic that happened to you or something that caused you great distress. And so they measured, or they were studying a group of pregnant women, and these women went through a series of interviews. And some of them, for the control groups, they would have no account or recounting of traumatic events or traumatic memories, and in the other groups they would actually go through a series of interviews where they go through traumatic events. And what they found was that less social sharing led to higher emotional recovery, so better recovery from the traumatic memories. And when there was more social sharing involved, the memories actually caused higher levels of emotional intensity when they were recalled. So this goes to show that emotions can be made more intense by the recalling of emotions. And of course, there's supposed to be this natural process of extinction of the traumatic event, but if somehow you are reliving it or sharing it over and over in some sort of way, bringing it back up into the mind, then that will, in some cases, increase the intensity, or just at the very least, cause you to not be able to get over that event as easily. It is possible in this study that the more intense a memory is, the much harder it is to get over, and therefore there is some therapy involved in being able to share what has happened. But there does show to be that the more you ruminate, or the more you relive that scenario, the less likely you are to actually handle the emotional intensity of it, or basically reduce the emotional intensity of it. And so the best way to help manage your emotions is to, in a biological sense, use cognitive behavioral therapy to get your mind off of things that may be causing you distress. Practice more mindfulness, and of course look for therapy. So some of the main tenets of cognitive behavioral therapy I thought were most relevant to my series was first being willing to take on new experiences, which definitely helps to move past old experiences. And of course, the more you take on these new experiences, the more you're using your perception of other people's mental states, so you're improving your social skills. Number two, you'll be focusing on one's own assets and skills to improve confidence. So the better that you are at being confident in your own skills in social behavior, the better your brain will be able to facilitate appropriate emotions or appropriate thought processes. And of course, number three is to overall gain better understanding of situations and behaviors, and of course, and for learning better ways of coping, and of course, taking time to relax, taking time away from the things that are stressing you out, is definitely one of the things that is shown to have positive effects overall on your mental health and even your physical health. And so that is my series on the biological basis of emotion and its role in our social interactions, where we went over the perception of emotions, facilitating thought using emotions, understanding of emotions, and managing our emotions. And of course, if you work on all of these things through therapy or through life experience, you will improve your overall emotional intelligence, which will ultimately help you to have a healthier social life as well as a healthier mental life. So, thank you very much.